Dr. Elijah!
Adam, Sarah, Max, welcome. Come in before the storm hits.
The climb was brutal. Adam's heavy-duty truck, modified for extreme terrain, finally crested the last jagged switchback, pulling their small convoy onto a narrow, wind-battered plateau. The air here was thin, sharp, and intensely cold, slicing through the cab's heating. They were several thousand feet high, well above the tree line in the unforgiving isolation of the Cascade Range. Their destination loomed ahead, the North Peak Fire Lookout Tower. It was a stark, skeletal structure, a glass and steel cube balanced precariously on heavy wooden stilts, seemingly piercing the vast gray sky. The entire landscape was immense and terrifyingly empty. Miles of snow-dusted ridges stretched to the horizon, reinforcing a sense of isolation that felt unnatural, almost total. "Welcome to the top of the world, gentlemen," said Dr. Elijah Thorne, the oldest man in the group. The retired professor, bundled in vintage Arctic gear, stepped out of the lead vehicle, a rugged government SUV. His voice was raspy, carrying the quiet reverence of a man facing a historical site of obsession. Adam emerged next, immediately assessing the structural integrity of the base. Beside him, Charlie, his ever-nervous partner, shuddered, pulling his collar high. "It's too quiet up here, Adam, and too open. Where's the emergency exit?" "There isn't one, Charlie. That's the point," Adam muttered, scanning the tower's base. His specialized job was to fix a complex, obsolete radio beacon system that had failed after 30 years of silence. But the structural dread of this place was overwhelming. Sarah, the National Forest Ranger assigned to their team, met them by the support platform. She was professional, efficient, and clearly uneasy. "The equipment is ready, Dr. Thorne, but the snow is coming. We need to complete the repairs and data collection before sundown." Behind them, Max, the young, eager research assistant, struggled to pull heavy sensor equipment from the SUV, his breath clouding violently in the frigid air. "Max, secure the thermal regulators," Dr. Thorne commanded, already focused on the glass cabin above. "The isolation is key, Adam. This location has remained untouched since the early 70s. That's why we're here." Adam looked up at the skeletal tower, its structure groaning faintly under the persistent cold wind. He noticed the heavy external door to the tower's base, a thick metal slab, was sealed not just with a modern bolt, but with a massive rusting padlock from decades past. The air around the structure itself seemed colder than the ambient temperature. "The structural issue isn't a radio, Doctor. It's the fact this place doesn't look like it wants visitors." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, pulling her hood down. "The tower has history, Adam, but the only thing failing right now is the heating unit. Let's get inside." Adam nodded, the professional mask firmly in place, but the quiet, unnatural dread of the lonely height had already settled deep in his gut. The cold was more than just weather. It was waiting. The initial hours were focused and frantic. Dr. Thorne, fueled by decades of anticipation, guided Max in setting up the sensor array, while Adam and Charlie worked in the cramped utility room, bypassing the tower's antique radio beacon system. Sarah kept watch, her attention split between the rapidly dropping temperature and the darkening sky. By 6 p.m., the job was nearly done. Adam had restored the power to the beacon system, and Dr. Thorne was recording the first stream of long-dormant atmospheric data. Relief was palpable, but fleeting. The blizzard struck without warning. It wasn't a snowfall. It was a violent, suffocating whiteout. A massive cold wind hammered the glass cabin, shaking the entire steel structure with terrifying force. Visibility dropped instantly to zero. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched, relentless shriek that seemed to mock the integrity of the walls. "Secure the external bracing!" Sarah yelled over the roar, scrambling toward the observation windows. "This is a Category 5 whiteout. We can't move until morning." As if to confirm her warning, the tower's internal power grid, which Adam had just stabilized, failed with a sudden final crack. The entire cabin plunged into absolute disorienting darkness, illuminated only by the frantic flashes of lightning visible through the swirling snow. The sudden loss of light and the unrelenting roar of the storm proved too much for Max. He was already mentally frayed by the altitude and the silence. Now, confined in the cold, shrieking blackness, he suffered a catastrophic break. He began to hyperventilate, his breathing ragged and hysterical. "We have to get out! We have to go down!" Max screamed, his voice dissolving into a desperate, uncontrollable wail.
He seized the locking bar of the external door and began slamming his body against the cold steel, trying to force the heavy bolt to slide back. It was then that the chaos became organized. The wind outside didn't just howl, it focused. A single, tremendous shudder rocked the tower, far exceeding the natural force of the storm. The wind concentrated its pressure directly on the metal door Max was fighting.
With a sound of wrenching metal and tearing steel, the locking mechanism, the old, thick padlock Adam had noticed, shattered. The metal door flew inward with explosive force, releasing a blinding column of white snow and frigid, screaming wind into the cabin. Max was caught in the sudden, savage pressure difference. Before anyone could reach him, the invisible, concentrated force of the wind, or something riding it, seized Max. He was violently lifted from the floor, pulled through the opening door, and instantly ripped out into the maelstrom. His frantic, high-pitched scream was cut off instantly by the overwhelming roar of the blizzard and the deafening clanging of the ruptured door against the steel structure. The sudden, horrifying silence that followed was broken only by the shriek of the storm. Max was gone, consumed by the whiteout, a casualty of the tower's terrifying structural failure. The metallic clang of the ruptured door smashing repeatedly against the wind-battered steel framework was the only sound besides the storm's continuous, deafening roar. Adam, Charlie, Sarah, and Dr. Thorne stumbled through the dark, their collective priority shifting from investigation to sheer survival. They managed to wrestle the heavy, broken door shut and wedge a heavy battery case against it, knowing the thin barrier offered negligible protection. The terror of Max's instantaneous, violent erasure hung heavy in the freezing air. They huddled near the center observation table, relying on Adam's high-powered field lantern for a desperate island of light. "He's gone," Charlie whispered, his voice vibrating with shock, staring at the shattered locking mechanism. "The wind, it just pulled him out." Dr. Thorne, despite his advanced age, seemed the most composed, yet his composure was terrifyingly hollow. He didn't offer comfort, he offered history. "The tower isn't just a lookout, Adam," Dr. Thorne rasped, pulling his collar higher. "It was decommissioned in 1974, officially due to obsolescence. Unofficially," he paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "It was a classified Cold War communication relay station, a listening post designed to intercept Soviet signals over the Pacific." Sarah nodded grimly, confirming the classified detail. The disaster he referred to, the reason it was abandoned, was a major personnel loss. They reported an accidental equipment failure. 3 men died in the final winter of operation. Adam felt the familiar prickle of recognition. The structural failure wasn't just metal, it was historical trauma. 3 men. What actually happened? Dr. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the lantern light, his voice sinking to a conspiratorial, urgent tone. "The reports were sealed, but my research confirmed the true cause. The men died of acoustic trauma, not an explosion. The internal communication system failed catastrophically, broadcasting a sustained high-frequency signal that drove them mad. They fought each other, they broke the equipment, they destroyed the logs. They killed themselves with sound." A profound, chilling realization settled over Adam. The failure wasn't just a radio beacon. "The emergency siren system," Adam breathed, looking at the corroded heavy-gauge wiring that ran along the ceiling near the central column of the tower. "It's the oldest system here. It runs on a separate, high-voltage battery. If the energy from that failed system is still active, still trapped..." He was cut short by a sound that vibrated deep in his teeth and bones. A low, deep, unnatural humming began to emanate from the central steel support column of the tower itself. It wasn't the sound of the wind or machinery. It was a rhythmic, resonant sound of immense trapped power drawing current. The humming intensified, growing in volume, shaking the very floor beneath their boots, signaling the activation of a structural failure far more dangerous than just sound. The scaling hum was physically painful now, resonating not just through the structure, but through their internal organs. Dr. Thorne, recognizing the sound, acted instantly. He pushed past the observation table, moving with surprising speed for a man his age, driven by the realization that the traumatic sound failure was activating. "The source is the relay junction. It must be disconnected before the frequency escalates," Dr. Thorne yelled, his voice strained against the deepening, ominous vibration. He raced toward the far corner of the cabin where the oldest communication wiring terminated in a complex, exposed panel. Sarah and Adam yelled for him to wait, but the professor was already there, illuminated by the bobbing lantern light. He frantically searched the panel, his gloved fingers tracing the web of ancient dust-caked wires, desperate to find the main siren cutoff. It was too late. The humming abruptly intensified, spiking into a high-pitched, invisible shriek localized entirely around Dr. Thorne. The sound wasn't auditory, it was kinetic. The invisible, acoustic force that had killed the original crew seized Dr. Thorne. He gasped, his hands flying to his ears, his body arcing in agony. Then, the unseen force delivered a focused, brutal blow. Dr. Thorne was violently slammed against the main, obsolete radio console. The impact was sickening, a sharp, wet sound of bone striking heavy metal. He slid down the console in a heap, motionless.
Adam and Charlie reacted instantly, pushing past Sarah and scrambling over the strewn equipment. "Doctor!" Adam yelled, dropping to his knees beside the crumpled figure. Dr. Thorne's neck was unnaturally angled, and the side of his head was bleeding profusely onto the cold metal console. The lack of movement and the structural trauma of the impact were final. He was gone, a casualty of the history he sought to uncover. Charlie dropped beside Adam, letting out a choked, desperate sound. He reached out to check the professor's wrist, his face a mask of disbelief and shock. It was the opening the entity needed. As Charlie leaned over the body, the invisible, concentrated force struck again. There was no warning, no scream, no cold wind, just a sudden, savage whiplash that caught Charlie's head and face. The force was swift, brutal, and visible only in its devastating effect. Charlie's head snapped violently back against the floor. He cried out, a sharp gurgling sound of immediate pain, and his hand flew to his face. When Adam quickly pulled Charlie back, the blood was immediate and copious, streaming down his friend's face from a deep gash near his temple. Charlie was conscious, but stunned, staggering, holding his head and staring at his own bloodied hand with wide, panicked eyes. The assault was physical, terrifying, and utterly focused. The unseen enemy was actively clearing the cabin. The cabin was chaos. 2 friends dead, Dr. Thorne a casualty of acoustic trauma, and Charlie bleeding heavily, clutching his head. Adam shoved Charlie towards Sarah, whose training had finally broken through her shock. She grabbed the field dressing from her pack, moving immediately to assess Charlie's wound. "Sarah, secure that bleed. Pressure, now," Adam commanded, his own adrenaline spiking as the low, dangerous humming intensified again. He knew the force was cycling, preparing for its final attack. He was the biggest threat. It was its next target. Adam scrambled toward the central support column, grabbing the heavy pry bar from his toolkit. He ignored the bodies, ignored the shattered console, his mind racing to the structural weakness, the Emergency Siren System. If the original personnel died because the sound drove them mad, then reversing the polarity, shorting the system, was the only chance. "The source is the siren. It's drawing the stored acoustic energy," Adam yelled, pulling the heavy panel off the support column with a wrenching tear of metal. "Sarah, listen to me. Find the main frequency regulator. It's marked tone on the upper console." Before Sarah could respond, the force struck again. It didn't use sound this time. It used kinetic malice. A sudden, tremendous shove slammed Adam sideways against the steel column. The impact was sickening, but the follow-up was worse. A sharp, invisible force delivered a devastating, focused blow directly to his lower right side. Adam screamed, a harsh, immediate sound of agony as the pain exploded through his abdomen and hip. He collapsed, clutching his side, his gloved fingers instantly coming away wet with thick, warm blood. He knew, with the cold clarity of a man who understands structural failure, that the injury was deep and incapacitating. He rolled onto his back, fighting the dizzying pain. The entity was upon them, a crushing presence radiating bone-deep cold, preparing to finish the job. "Go, both of you," Adam gasped, pushing Charlie away from him with his good arm. He shoved the pry bar into Sarah's hand. "The tone regulator, the frequency is wrong. You have to reverse the polarity. It's a blue wire and a yellow contact. That's the only fix." Charlie, his face smeared with blood and terror, stared helplessly at Adam's wound. "Adam, no, we have to get you down. We can't leave you." "I'm the structural failure now. I can't move," Adam yelled, his voice strained and desperate. "Sarah, you're the ranger. You're the clearest head. Fix the tone." Adam knew he was sacrificing himself. His blood was pooling rapidly on the cold floor, the life draining out of him, but his mind was still operational. His job was to diagnose the failure, and the final fix now required his life as the distraction. Sarah, her face grim with terrible resolve, took the heavy pry bar, her eyes locked on the console. She understood the final, terrible equation.
Sarah didn't hesitate. She threw the heavy pry bar onto the console table and shoved Charlie, who was stumbling with shock, toward the wiring panel. The entity, now focused entirely on Adam, was oblivious to the new threat. The overwhelming, painful humming intensified, pressing down on Adam's injured side like a lead weight, attempting to incapacitate him completely. "Go! Go!" Adam gasped, pushing himself against the support column, drawing the entity's attention with a strained yell. Sarah, moving with the cold efficiency of her ranger training, ignored the terrifying noise and the pooling blood around Adam. She reached the central panel, her hands shaking, illuminated by the frantic bobbing light of the lantern. Charlie, leaning heavily on the console, pointed with a bloody hand at the junction labeled Tone. "Blue wire, yellow contact, reverse the polarity," he choked out, his voice weak. The unseen force, realizing the threat, abandoned Adam with a sickening rush of frigid air and slammed into the console. The heavy metal structure shuddered violently, throwing Charlie hard against the wall. The blow was purely kinetic, a final brutal attempt to protect the structural failure.
Sarah braced herself against the impact. She seized the insulated wire cutters and, using the heavy pry bar to pin the wires down against the shaking metal, she focused on the specific wires Adam had identified. The wires were humming with raw, unseen energy. The force struck again, trying to rip the cutters from her grip. Her hands were jarred, her fingers screaming with pain, but she held the tool steady. "Now, Charlie, distract it!" Sarah screamed, desperate. Charlie, seeing the immense pressure bearing down on Sarah, crawled toward the shattered radio console and slammed his fist down repeatedly on the broken metal housing. The noise was pathetic, but it drew a sliver of the entity's focus away from the delicate task. Sarah took a chance. Ignoring the agony in her hands, she brought the cutters down. The sound was not a snap, but a final, powerful, electrical crunch. The result was total, instantaneous. The oppressive, resonant humming that had plagued them for hours, the acoustic trauma that killed Dr. Thorne, stopped abruptly. The immense pressure was gone. The chilling, pervasive cold instantly lifted. The tower was plunged into a deafening, terrifying silence. They were all released. The external effect was just as profound. Outside the glass cabin, the devastating, relentless blizzard stopped immediately. The high-pitched shriek of the wind died to a barely perceptible whisper. The intense whiteout vanished, leaving the vast, empty mountain landscape exposed beneath a sky that was now clear and starkly black. Adam collapsed. The sudden cessation of pain, almost as disorienting as the blow itself. Sarah leaned against the console, her lungs heaving, the stench of burnt wiring thick in the air. Charlie slid down the wall, his bloody face slack with utter exhaustion. They were severely wounded, surrounded by the bodies of their friends, but the structural flaw, the thing that killed with sound, was silenced. The cold, empty dread of the mountain was all that remained. The silence was heavy, profound, and utterly deafening after the acoustic trauma. Adam pushed himself onto his knees, ignoring the agonizing, burning pain in his side. He had to move. The cold wasn't just weather now, it was a consequence of the silence. "Down, now!" Adam commanded, his voice hoarse and weak. Sarah, despite her exhaustion, moved first. She quickly tore strips from an unused thermal blanket to stabilize Charlie's bleeding head wound, and then wrapped Adam's side tightly, using his own belt as a makeshift tourniquet. Charlie, silent and pale, could barely put weight on his legs. The descent was slow, brutal agony. They used the internal steel ladder, moving one agonizing rung at a time, each step sending jolts of white-hot pain through Adam's torso. They left the bodies of Dr. Thorne and Max in the dark cabin, casualties of history and acoustic malice. They reached the base platform, battered, bloodied, and exhausted. They turned the corner, looking for the safety of the truck. The sight was crushing. The sudden, chaotic blizzard that had struck the tower had dumped an impossible volume of snow. Adam's heavy-duty truck, his reliable means of escape, was completely buried. Only the roof and the tops of the heavy tires were visible, entombed in massive, rock-hard drifts. The snow was well over 5 feet deep and packed solid. Charlie let out a broken, defeated sound, stumbling to his knees beside the drift. "It's stuck, hopelessly stuck. We can't dig that out, Adam, not now." They wasted 20 agonizing minutes in a desperate, futile attempt.
Adam tried to shovel with the pry bar, the effort tearing at his side wound. Sarah and Charlie tried to break the snow with their feet, quickly realizing the depth and the dense, icy pack were immovable. The cold air burned in their lungs, and their wounds throbbed with paralyzing intensity. Exhaustion was setting in, thick and suffocating. "We need heat! We need to move!" Adam gasped, leaning against the cold metal of the tower base, the realization of their complete environmental failure sinking in. Sarah's eyes suddenly widened, scanning the base of the mountain. "I saw the Forest Service maintenance road. There's a small reinforced garage built into the rock." A garage means a vehicle. A jeep, a snow-capable vehicle. The decision was immediate and absolute. Leaving their packs, their satellite phone, and the only vehicle they had, they turned toward the vast, empty mountain slope. Their journey would now be on foot. Slow, painful, and exposed. Sarah took the lead, using the pry bar as a heavy, inadequate walking stick. Charlie followed, leaning heavily on Sarah. Adam trailed behind, walking with a crippled gait, fighting the draining cold and the persistent, agonizing throb of his side wound. The descent into the snow-choked wilderness had begun. The journey down the snow-choked slope was a nightmare of stumbling, burning lungs, and paralyzed muscles. Every step was a battle against the deep snow, the cold, and the draining pain of their wounds. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light of the rising sun.
Finally, Sarah stopped. Ahead of them, almost hidden by a fresh drift, was the maintenance garage, a low concrete structure built directly into the side of the mountain. It looked like a tomb, sealed against the elements. Using the key from her own government-issued pack, Sarah wrestled with the heavy, reinforced steel door. It scraped open with a terrible groan of rusted hinges. The interior was dark, smelling of oil, gasoline, and cold stone. And there it was, a rugged old Forest Service Jeep covered in a thin sheet of dust. Sarah immediately got to work, her professional instincts overriding her exhaustion. She ignored the electric start, knowing the cold battery would fail. She used the choke and the pump, and after 3 wrenching, desperate attempts, the engine caught with a satisfying, deep-throated roar. The sound was the sweetest music Adam had ever heard. They didn't wait. Charlie hauled himself into the back seat, collapsing onto the gearbags. Adam struggled into the passenger seat, leaning his entire weight against the door. Sarah threw the Jeep into gear, smashing through the brittle ice that had sealed the garage door, and accelerated down the rough, snowy track. They drove in silence, watching the vast, empty mountain recede behind them. The fire lookout tower, the skeletal structure that had consumed 2 of their friends, was a tiny, distant pinprick against the huge, indifferent landscape. It stood silent, its acoustic failure fixed, its true nature hidden once more. The trauma was absolute. They were the only witnesses, the only ones who knew the truth about Max and Dr. Thorne, who were now entombed somewhere in the high snow. Casualties not of the weather, but of sound made manifest. Adam carefully pulled down his collar and examined the wound on his side. It was a deep, jagged, and permanent scar, a physical confirmation of the invisible force. Charlie sat in the back seat, silent, his bloody face staring straight ahead. Sarah gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, her eyes carrying the cold, terrible knowledge of the mountain's power. They had escaped, but they hadn't won. The structural failure was external, and they were the internal damage. They were alive, but irrevocably changed. That tower is still standing up there, silently watching the valley. If I gave you the coordinates, would you dare go back? Tell me in the comments, should the Phixer ever return to the Watchtower?